I was working as a nurse at the hospital last year when all this happened, doing 12-hour night shifts 3 times a week. I'm Sarah, 26, and my life was basically meds, charting, and trying to sleep during daylight. I shared a 2-bedroom ground-floor apartment with a roommate named Ashley, found through Craigslist. The first 3 months were honestly great. She worked the front desk at a dental clinic. I worked nights. We split bills 50-50, kept the place clean, and stayed out of each other's business. About a month before the incident, Ashley started dating a guy named Daryl. She said he was a freelance programmer who worked from home and could pick up contracts whenever. At first, he came over for a couple hours after her shift. Then he stayed overnight. Then he started showing up in the middle of the day, when Ashley was at work and I was at the hospital. Because my schedule was predictable. Within 3 weeks, his stuff was everywhere. Laptop on our dining table, clothes in the hallway closet, his toothbrush next to mine, his takeout containers stacked in our trash. It felt like I'd gained a second roommate without being asked. My schedule was rigid. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Ashley and Daryl knew exactly when I wasn't home, and that started to bother me more than the mess. I finally brought it up. I told Ashley, if Daryl is living here, he needs to pay 1/3 of the rent and utilities, or at least buy his own food and toiletries. She didn't even let me finish before saying he was having temporary financial problems, and it would only be for a couple months. I said, I work 12-hour shifts and I'm in school. I can't pay extra because your boyfriend is hanging out here. She got offended, called me heartless, and we barely spoke for days after. A few mornings later, coming home from my Wednesday night shift, I found the front door unlocked. Not forced, just shut without the lock turned. I stood there with my key in my hand, listening like that would tell me anything. I went in, checked the living room, the kitchen, then my room. I called Ashley at work and asked if she forgot to lock up. She sounded confused and said she definitely locked it when she left at 7 a.m. I tried to tell myself the lock hadn't caught, but it nagged at me because it didn't feel accidental. The next week it happened again. Thursday morning, door unlocked again. This time I asked Ashley straight up if Daryl was leaving it open so he could come and go whenever he wanted. Ashley snapped, accused me of picking on him without proof. I said, then who is leaving our door unlocked? She just repeated that he wouldn't do that. After that argument, the door was always locked when I got home, like someone had finally decided to stop giving me a reason to complain. 2 weeks passed with that tense kind of peace where you pretend the problem is solved because you're tired. Daryl was still around constantly, but Ashley was at least speaking to me again, and I was just trying to keep my head down and get through my shifts. Then Friday evening my unit had a low patient load, and they sent me home early, which almost never happens. Normally I'd be at work all night and come back Saturday morning. Instead, I went to bed and actually slept like a person. I woke up around 9 a.m. to the sound of the front door opening. For half a second I thought it was Ashley. Then I remembered she was supposed to be at work until 2. I stayed still and listened. Heavy male footsteps moved through the apartment, slow and careful. It wasn't Ashley's light walk, and it wasn't Daryl either. Daryl was skinny and quick and kind of dragged his feet. This sounded like someone placing each step on purpose, like they were checking rooms. The footsteps went from the living room to the kitchen, and then I heard the refrigerator opening. My door was cracked open a few inches, and through the gap, I saw a large man in a dark hoodie bent over by the TV. He unplugged cables and dropped them into a big bag. He didn't hesitate. I stayed still on my bed with my phone under the pillow and didn't turn the screen on. He went into the kitchen. Cabinets opened, then the fridge. Bags rustled and cans clinked. He was stuffing food into the same bag, like he expected to be there a while. The only explanation my brain could hold was that he thought nobody was home. His footsteps came back and stopped right outside my door. I clenched the blanket, ready to yell, ready to kick the door, whatever. He just stood there for a few seconds. I saw the toes of his shoes through the crack. Then he turned away. The front door closed. I heard him go down the outside stairs and disappear. I waited a beat, then got up, locked my bedroom door from the inside, and grabbed my phone. My hands shook so badly I misdialed twice. When I finally got 911, I could barely get the words out. She had me repeat the address, asked if I could whisper, and told me to keep the line open until officers arrived. The dispatcher told me to stay locked in and not open the door for anyone but police. They arrived in about 7 minutes. I heard a knock and a man say, "Sarah, police." I made him repeat it, then opened up. 2 patrol officers came in first and swept the apartment, and a detective followed right after. They checked windows, the door, and asked if I was hurt. Once they said it was clear, we listed what was missing. From the living room, the game console and my laptop from the desk. From my room, my small TV and an external hard drive from my desk with years of photos and documents. From the kitchen, several cans, a pack of pasta, and a bottle of whiskey Ashley kept above the fridge. The detective asked who else had access. I told him about Daryl basically living with us, and about the mornings I found the door unlocked. I told him my night schedule was the same every week, so it wasn't hard to figure out when I'd be gone. That evening, Ashley and Daryl came home to 3 police cars outside. Ashley's first words were, "Did they steal any of my stuff?" The detective took Daryl aside. Daryl admitted he went out for 5 minutes to get coffee, around 9:30, and left the door unlocked. He said, "You're usually at work then. What's the difference?" The coffee shop cameras showed him there around 9:40, but the detective said that didn't wipe it clean. Someone could have known his habits and mine. A week later, they arrested a man who knew someone from Daryl's old place, and he had prior theft convictions. He admitted Daryl had mentioned girls who work nights, and that our door got left unlocked. Ashley still defended Daryl and called it an accident, and she never apologized to me. I moved out a week later with the police report, and the landlord let me end the lease without a fee. They never recovered my hard drive. It's been 4 months, and I still wake up at every sound, and I keep replaying that moment in bed, 5 feet from a stranger who could have done anything to me, and only chance saved me that morning. Last summer, I was planning a Sunday brunch with my girlfriends and decided late Saturday evening to drive to Safeway for all the necessary ingredients. It was around 9 p.m. The store closed at 10, so I had plenty of time to calmly buy everything on my list. I wrote down eggs, bacon, orange juice, croissants, berries for garnish, and maybe champagne for mimosas. It was nothing fancy, just my attempt at being the friend who actually follows through. We'd been talking about it in our group chat for 2 weeks, and I didn't want to show up unprepared again. Before leaving, I checked the list one more time, because I'm me, and I don't trust my own memory. I stood at the counter, reread it, then added a couple small things and grabbed my keys. That little delay was maybe 5 minutes. I didn't know it then, but that's the kind of detail you replay later until you feel sick. If I'd walked out the door right away, I would have been in that parking lot earlier. I got in my car, buckled, and pulled out like it was any other errand. The air was warm and I felt fine. Safeway was about 15 minutes away on not too busy evening streets. I took the familiar route, half on autopilot, with the radio on low. I remember thinking about where I'd set up the plates, and whether I should slice the fruit ahead of time or let everyone pick at it. That's how ordinary my headspace was. I pictured us sitting on my terrace in the morning, drinking mimosas, talking over each other, laughing at dumb stuff, and then arguing about what show we were all watching. I wasn't in any rush. I just wanted to get in, pay, and go home. Then, out of nowhere, 3 police cars flew past me in the opposite lane at a speed that made me flinch. Lights flashing, sirens screaming. A fire truck followed, then 2 more police cars, all headed toward where I'd just come from. I slowed down and pulled a little right so they had space, even though they weren't in my lane. My stomach dropped anyway. You don't see that many vehicles unless something bad is happening. I said out loud, "What the hell?" and turned the radio down like that would help. After they disappeared, I kept driving, tense still. I hoped it was a wreck somewhere else and kept going. When I pulled up to Safeway about 10 minutes later, I immediately knew something was wrong. Yellow tape boxed off a big section of the parking lot. At least 6 police cars were there with lights going, plus the fire truck and an ambulance. People stood back in a line, customers and staff mixed together, a lot of them filming on their phones. I parked far from the cordon and walked closer. The front of the store on the automotive side was destroyed, like it had been punched open. Broken glass was everywhere, and a couple shelves were actually out on the pavement, tipped over like someone dragged them through the wall. An officer held a hand out and said, "Ma'am, you can't go in." I told him I wasn't trying to. I just needed to know what happened. He didn't give details, just kept scanning the crowd. That's when I saw Jennifer, a cashier I'd chatted with 100 times. She was pale, shaking, clutching a jacket around her shoulders. I walked over and asked, "Jen, are you okay?" She nodded, but her eyes were blank with shock. I asked what happened and if she was okay too. Jennifer swallowed and just started talking fast. She said 25 or 30 minutes ago, while I was home checking my list, some psycho stole a bulldozer from the construction site a block away. They're building an office complex there and leave equipment overnight. The guy started it and drove through the streets. First, he knocked down 3 or 4 telephone poles at an intersection, sparks flying, wires dropping. Then he rammed a garage at a house. People were calling the police, but the bulldozer was moving faster than anyone expected. Then he came to the Safeway parking lot and headed straight for the building, right at the automotive department where they sold oils, filters, and car accessories. Jennifer pointed at the torn open side of the store and said, "He didn't even slow down." The bulldozer hit the wall at full speed. Glass panels flew out, the metal frame bent, and the bucket punched through concrete blocks like cardboard. Inside, people screamed and ran before they understood what they were seeing. Several tall shelves stacked with motor oil tipped over, and bottles started popping and shattering as they hit the floor. Black liquid spread across the tiles, mixing with glass shards. The bulldozer stalled halfway in the hole it made, engine still roaring, like it was stuck on the wreckage. Jennifer said for a second everyone froze, because you expect a driver to climb out looking shocked or hurt. Instead, the man jumped down from the cab with a long metal crowbar. He burst inside through the breach, swinging it over his head and screaming something incoherent. She couldn't make out words, just howling and cursing, like he wasn't talking to anyone, just raging. Rick, the security guard, reacted immediately. Jennifer watched him hit the panic button and call police while yelling, "Everybody run! Emergency exits! Go!" He didn't go toward the guy. He backed people away from the front. Customers dropped baskets, left carts in the aisles, and scattered in different directions. Some ran toward the main grocery exit, and others cut behind the shelves toward the back doors. Jennifer was at Register 3, about 10 meters from where the wall gave way. She saw the yellow bucket tearing chunks of concrete and metal loose, and she saw the shelf beside her start to lean. She said her brain tried to treat it like a normal accident, like a display falling, until she realized it was coming right at her. She jumped back at the last moment. The shelf crashed down hard, and dozens of bottles smashed at once. One customer, an elderly man, was close enough that the falling metal nearly clipped him. A bakery employee named Rosa grabbed his arm and yanked him aside. Jennifer said the man looked confused, like he couldn't process why a stranger was dragging him. But Rosa didn't stop. She just kept saying, "Keep moving," and pushed him toward the back with everyone else. Police arrived fast, surrounding the opening and the front doors. Officers shouted commands at the man with the crowbar, He tried to swing at one of them, missed, and lost his balance, like his legs weren't keeping up with his anger. That stumble was the only opening they needed. 5 officers rushed him, drove him to the ground, and wrestled his arms behind his back. He fought, spat, and screamed about the end of the world and conspiracies while they cuffed him. I listened to Jennifer and felt it hit me. If I hadn't delayed at home, double-checking my list and adding champagne and berries, I would have been in that store. And I always start with automotive. They sell the car air fresheners I like, and I would have been standing right where that bucket came through the wall. I told Jennifer I was sorry, that I was glad she made it out, and I hugged her before she could protest. Then I went back to my car. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel. I drove to another grocery store across town, bought everything, got home around 11, and didn't sleep, replaying that thin line between normal and nightmare. I realized I was trapped when his hand landed on my driver's side door handle. Everything before that moment felt like a normal request for help in a parking garage. But let me back up. I had driven out to an office center on the edge of town for a meeting with potential investors, and I got there early because I hate rushing. If I'm nervous, being late makes me stupid. I parked on the level near the entrance, where the lights were brightest, and where people would see me if something went wrong. Around 8 p.m. it was getting dark, and the garage was mostly empty, just a few cars scattered around. I sat in my car for a minute staring at my calendar reminder like it was going to change. About 15 minutes before the meeting, I went out to smoke and calm down. I walked away from the doors so I wouldn't blow smoke at people, maybe 50 meters between 2 rows of cars. I could still see the entrance sign, but it felt farther than it should. I was halfway through the cigarette when I heard someone clear his throat behind me. It wasn't dramatic, just enough to make me turn. A man in his 40s came up to me in a business suit and tie, looking like any other office worker finishing his day. He apologized a couple times, like he was embarrassed, and said, "Sorry to bother you, my car won't start." He said it was 2 rows over, and asked if I could help jumpstart his battery. I keep jumper cables in my trunk, so I said sure. I offered to pull my car over to his, so we could do it quick, and I wouldn't have to drag cables across the lane. He shook his head and said his car wasn't responding at all, and he couldn't even get anything to light up. He said we'd have to check it where it sat. That sounded reasonable, and the guy looked clean and calm, so I went with him. As we walked, he stayed a half step behind me. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that if I stopped, he'd bump me. I tried small talk like, "What floor are you on?" And he just said, "Second," and didn't add anything. When we got to a dark blue sedan, he stopped and said, "Wait, I think I was wrong. It's not the battery." He popped the hood, stared inside like he already knew the answer, and then turned to me. "It's something with the engine. Can you give me a ride to the auto shop? Just a couple blocks, 5 minutes." He said it like we'd already agreed. That's when it clicked for me. Why start with the battery story at all? Why not just ask for a ride back where the doors and cameras were? I know people panic when their car dies, but this felt rehearsed. I said no. I told him I had a meeting starting soon, and I couldn't be late. I started walking back toward my car, and he walked right with me, closer than before, still talking. He said it would only take a few minutes. He had an important event. He'd pay me back, all that. I kept repeating, "Sorry, I can't." And I tried to sound calm, but my heart was thumping hard enough that I could hear it. Halfway back, he stopped pretending it was a favor. "You can help, you just don't want to," he said, like I was the problem. I picked up my pace and he matched it. We reached my car. I pulled out my key fob, pressed unlock. The locks clicked, and in the next second, his hand grabbed the driver's side door handle before I could open it. "Get in the car, I'll explain the route," he said in a completely different tone now, hard and cold. I tried to pull away, said I wasn't going anywhere, pulled the handle toward me, but he held it firm. He looked around the empty parking garage and asked, "Are you here alone? Is anyone waiting for you?" My heart was pounding so loud I could hear the pulse in my ears. I lied and said my coworkers were waiting downstairs, that we were driving together after the meeting. I even pointed toward the stairs like that proved it. He smirked, looked down the empty lane and said, "I don't see anyone." He still had his hand on the driver door handle, and his body was angled so I couldn't get between him and the door. I stopped thinking of him as some stressed office guy. This was control. My hands were shaking. I shoved my phone out of my pocket and held it up like I was already on a call. The screen was locked and dark, but I spoke loud anyway. "Hello, security. I'm in the parking lot. Level 2, row C. I need help." He glanced around fast, like he was listening for footsteps. His grip loosened for half a second. I used it and hit the panic button on my key fob. The alarm screamed through the whole garage and my lights started flashing. He jumped back and cursed. At the same time, I saw headlights at the entrance, 2 cars pulling in, probably people coming back from work. I ran toward those headlights yelling, "Help! Help!" I did not look behind me. The alarm was still wailing and I just kept moving until I reached the elevator area. An elderly couple was stepping out of the elevator. I was bent over trying to breathe, and I couldn't get words out. The older man asked what was wrong, and I pointed back at my car, still flashing, but the guy in the suit was already gone between the rows. This time I unlocked my phone and called 911 for real. My hands shook so bad I hit the wrong button and had to start over. I told the dispatcher someone tried to force me into my car and ran when the alarm went off. Police got there in about 10 minutes. I gave a statement right there by the elevator while one officer walked the levels. I described him as tall, around 40, dark suit, short hair. Nothing that would stand out, which felt awful to say. They searched the garage, but he was gone. They checked the cameras too. The video was grainy in the evening light, but you could at least see him come up to me and then step away fast when the alarm started. One officer filed the report and told me, pretty calmly, not to get out of my car in empty places when someone asks for help. "Call security, call us, but don't go walking around with strangers," he said. I nodded, because what else do you do? I sat in the back of the patrol car for another 20 minutes, trying to slow my breathing. My heart kept racing and my hands would not stop trembling. My mouth was so dry it hurt. I kept checking the garage lanes like he might pop back out, even though I knew that was stupid. I never made it to the meeting. I called the investor rep, apologized without going into details, and asked to reschedule for next week. He sounded confused but agreed. When I finally drove home, I was still shaking. That night, I barely slept. His smirk kept looping in my head. I kept replaying what would have happened if I had gotten in the car with him, if those people had not shown up at the entrance, and if I had not pretended to call security. I'm 28, and for the last 3 years, I've worked as a pharmaceutical sales rep, driving to small towns and clinics within about a 200-mile radius from our head office. The schedule is usually predictable. Leave around 7 or 8, see 3 or 4 clinics, do my pitch, then get home around 6 or 7. It's not glamorous, but it pays, and I know the doctors by name. That Thursday in late October, I had a meeting with the head doctor of a clinic in Riverdale, about 130 miles away. 2 hours there, 2 hours back, and usually an hour in his office. I left at 8, got there early, parked behind the building, and carried my bag inside, trying not to look like I was already tired. The appointment was for 11. The receptionist gave me the practiced smile and said, "He's running behind. I'm sorry." I told her it was fine because what else do you say? I sat in the waiting area, checked my notes, and answered emails on my phone, pretending I wasn't counting every minute. Dr. Harrison finally saw me at 11:30. He looked like he'd been putting out fires all morning. He shook my hand and said, "Let's do this quick." I started the presentation like normal, but he stopped me a lot. He wanted details about the clinical trials, not the usual surface stuff. What were the side effects by age group? How many patients dropped out? What did you compare it to exactly? On one hand, that was great, because it meant he was taking it seriously. On the other hand, I could feel the day sliding away. We finished around 2 p.m. I was packing up when he said, "Lunch? There's a cafe nearby. We can talk delivery terms without staff walking in." I couldn't refuse. Riverdale isn't a huge place, and if his clinic started ordering, my manager would be thrilled. So we went, and lunch turned into a negotiation with sandwiches in the middle. He wanted specific delivery windows, a clear chain of contact, and he kept circling back to storage requirements. I kept smiling and saying, "I can confirm that," while thinking about my drive. By the time I got back to my car, it was almost 3:30. The route home was Highway 47, 2 lanes through flat rural country, corn and soybeans, and the occasional farmhouse by the road. I was alone, listening to a podcast, which sounds dumb now, but it kept me awake. I had cold coffee in a thermos from a gas station outside Riverdale, and I kept sipping it, even though it tasted like plastic. Daylight hung on for a while, and I told myself I would still get home before it was late. Then I got stuck behind 2 tractors you couldn't pass, and everything slowed down. You can't speed around them on those roads without risking a head-on collision, so you just sit there and watch the slow blink of their orange lights. By the time it got properly dark, I'd driven maybe 60 miles, and I still had about 70 left. Around 11 p.m., it was complete darkness, just my headlights carving out a narrow tunnel of road. That's when I saw a white Ford pickup pulled onto the right shoulder with hazard lights flashing. Next to it stood a man in a bright yellow reflective vest, like road workers wear, waving both arms over his head at me to stop. Instinctively, I took my foot off the gas and started slowing down. But as I rolled closer, my stomach tightened. It was almost midnight. No other cars, no houses, just dark fields on both sides. The truck looked normal, no hood up, no flat tire, nothing that screamed emergency. The man wasn't limping or frantic. His movements were controlled, almost careful. My company drills into us, especially women reps, that you don't stop for strangers on isolated roads. You call for help from a safe place. You keep moving. I kept thinking, if he was really stranded, why didn't he call a tow truck or roadside assistance like everyone does now? Something about this scene seemed staged, unnatural. I didn't stop. I honked twice so he knew I'd seen him and kept going. In the mirror, the man in the reflective vest watched my car pass. He didn't chase me or act panicked. He just stood by the white pickup, like he was waiting. Half a mile later, I felt guilty, so I called 911 and reported a stranded motorist on Highway 47. White Ford pickup, hazards on, man in a reflective vest flagging cars down. The dispatcher asked for the location. I said mile marker 94, between the Oakville and Madison exits. She thanked me and said she'd send a patrol to check. 5 minutes later, my headlights caught 2 orange cones and a wooden plank laid across my lane. I braked and stopped about 10 meters back. High beams showed long nails driven through the board, sharp points up. The cones and board were placed neatly, straight across the lane. It clicked right then. The guy back there was bait. You hit the spikes, you stop with shredded tires, and he walks up to help. I checked my mirrors, no headlights, nothing coming either way. I stayed in the car, eased into the oncoming lane, went around the trap, and got back into my lane once I cleared it. Then I punched the gas. I was near 80, over the 65, and I didn't care. I called 911 again with shaking hands. A male dispatcher answered. I told him there was a spiked board and cones around mile marker 98 or 99, maybe half a mile after the pickup I'd reported. He said he'd relay it immediately and told me not to stop until I reached a populated area with lights and people. I kept driving, checking my mirrors over and over, but nothing followed. About 15 miles later, I hit Harmony and took the exit. I pulled into the brightly lit 24-hour Walmart where other cars were parked and people were walking in and out. I got out and checked my tires. All 4 were intact. Inside, I bought a bottle of water and sat by the entrance until my hands stopped shaking. I scrolled through my phone, reading news stories, just trying to let the adrenaline drop. Once my breathing was steady again, I decided I had to finish the drive. After 20 minutes, I drove the last 40 minutes home, got in around 1 a.m., and only relaxed after I locked my apartment door. Friday morning, I called the county police office and got transferred to Officer Jenkins. He said patrol found the cones and the spiked board near mile 98, removed them, and photographed them. But the white pickup and the man near mile 94 were gone when they arrived. He also said they'd had 2 similar reports in the last month on that same stretch at night. One driver hit the spikes and got away on a spare before anyone reached them, and another driver noticed the trap and went around it. They think someone is setting ambushes to rob people or steal cars, and even with extra patrols, they haven't caught anyone yet. After that, I changed how I work, pushing those meetings earlier so I'm driving back in daylight, and if I have to be out late, I take the busier Interstate 70, even if it adds time. I told my manager, and he backed me up. Sometimes I replay how close I got to being stranded out there alone, but now I always trust that feeling when something seems wrong or suspicious, even if I can't logically explain why. The photograph of me at the gym's front desk, printed from the security camera footage, was lying in a notebook on my attic floor, next to 20 other pictures of me from places I go every single day. I found them 3 weeks ago when police searched my house, and I still can't sleep without checking every room twice before bed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This whole thing started 3 months back when Jennifer signed up for personal training sessions at the gym where I work. I'm Mark, 28, and I've been training people in Texas for 12 years. Most clients just want reps and reminders, but Jennifer wanted my life story. She was about 40, always in expensive workout sets, and she booked the maximum, 5 sessions a week. At first I thought she was just motivated, the kind who treats the gym like an appointment. By the second session she was asking where I lived, if I had a girlfriend, and what I did on my days off. If I dodged the questions, she'd laugh and call me mysterious. She also kept finding reasons to touch me, brushing my arm during rows or letting her hand linger on a stretch. I stayed professional, like I always do, and I started standing a step farther back when I coached her form. She noticed and said, "Relax, Mark. We were meant to meet by fate." After the 3rd session, she came in early with a little gift bag and a smile that felt practiced. Inside was a smartwatch that had to cost a few $100. I told her I couldn't take it, that the gym has a policy, and I walked it to the front desk so it got logged. She didn't get angry, which honestly made it worse, because she just watched me like I'd made a cute mistake. A week later, she offered triple my rate for private sessions at her house and said it would be just the 2 of us. No prying eyes. I said no, kept it polite, and told her I only train at the gym. She stared for a beat, said okay, and then she stopped showing up. For that whole week she didn't answer calls and missed every session, so I figured she moved on. Rob pulled me aside and said Jennifer had called asking about my days off and where I lived. He said, "I didn't tell her anything, but be careful, man." The next week she returned acting normal, and she trained with a female friend like nothing had happened. I told myself it was over, and I focused on other clients. 2 weeks later, I started seeing her white Lexus in places that were way too specific to my routine. It was at the grocery store lot on Saturday mornings, outside my dry cleaner near home, and once at a gas station 10 miles from the gym. Each time she acted busy, not looking at me, but it stopped feeling like coincidence. I started taking quick photos of the car and writing down dates and locations in my phone, just in case I ever had to show it to police. When I finally told Rob about the sightings, he offered to ban her from the gym. I said no, because she wasn't breaking rules inside, and I didn't want a scene without proof. So I kept my distance, kept documenting, and hoped she'd get bored. Then dumbbells in my garage weren't where I'd left them, like someone used them and set them back wrong. Twice the garage door was cracked open, even though I was sure I closed it. My neighbor Marcus said he saw a light-colored car in my driveway on Tuesday while I was at work. That night I called my friend Brad, who's a cop, and he told me to change my locks and get cameras. I ordered a camera set right away and scheduled installation for Friday. But on Thursday evening I came home, and the kitchen light was on, even though I'd checked everything before leaving. And something felt wrong. Really wrong. Like the air itself was different. I stepped back out onto the porch and called Brad, trying not to look at the windows. He told me to stay outside and keep the line open. 10 minutes later, he pulled up, still in his work clothes, and asked, "You are sure you turned it all off?" I said yes, and he nodded like he had already decided this was real. We went in together and he walked the house like he was clearing a call. Kitchen first, then living room, then bedrooms. He checked closets, behind doors, under the beds, even the shower curtain. Nothing was out of place except that light. The locks were not broken, which made my stomach twist because it meant someone knew how to get in. We almost did not bother with the attic. I had not been up there since moving in, and it is just boxes and old gear. Brad stopped under the hatch and said, "If somebody is hiding, that is where they go." He pulled down the ladder and climbed first, flashlight in one hand, his other hand on the frame. Up there, between the boxes, was a clean sleeping bag laid out flat. Next to it were empty water bottles lined up like someone was trying to be neat, and a grocery bag with protein bar wrappers from the same brand I buy. I did not speak for a second. Brad crouched and said, "How long has this been here?" I told him I did not know, because I honestly did not. He moved a box and found a leather notebook wedged behind it. When I opened it, my hands started shaking so bad I almost dropped it. Inside was my training schedule for the last 3 months, my days off, my usual stops, even notes about when I take the trash out. The last pages had printed photos of me at the gym, in my driveway, and one shot taken through my living room window. Brad took the notebook, told me to go downstairs, and called for backup from my kitchen. Officers arrived fast, then a detective. They photographed the attic, bagged the sleeping bag and wrappers, and dusted what they could. I kept answering the same questions, trying not to sound crazy. When I said Jennifer, the detective wrote it down and asked if I had ever been to her house. Brad said they would move on a warrant for breaking and entering and stalking. By the next day, they told me her apartment was empty. Her phone was disconnected, and her job said she quit a week earlier with no reason. That night, I packed a bag and went to my brother Kyle's place. I did not bring much, just clothes, my laptop, and my work stuff. The next morning, I transferred to a different branch of the gym about 30 miles away. Police kept looking, checking cameras where they could and talking to people who claimed they barely knew her. Every time I called, it was the same answer. No updates. Nothing solid. A month passed and life got quieter. I started getting used to the new schedule and new faces, and I caught myself going whole hours without scanning parking lots. Yesterday morning at Kyle's door was a white envelope, no return address. Inside was a photo of me outside the new gym, and on the back a note, "I miss our training sessions. See you soon." Police have the envelope, patrols are up, and still no leads. She found me again anyway, and I do not know what comes next now. So, I'll just breeze through the basics to get to the stuff that actually matters. I was working as a barista at a 24-hour coffee shop near campus, taking shifts between college classes. I was also trying to keep my grades up, so late shifts were the easiest ones to grab. Most nights my shift ended around 1 in the morning, and I walked home because the buses had already stopped and I didn't have a car. It was about 20 minutes if I didn't detour. This was a muggy July night, the kind Oregon gets a few weeks a year. I was closing with my manager Jessica, wiping tables, flushing the coffee machines, breaking down the espresso station, and hauling the last trash bag out back. Jessica stayed inside to count the register and do the deposit, and she kept the front door locked while she did it. On my way out, she said, "Text me when you get home." And it wasn't the casual kind of reminder. I said, yeah, like I always did, and she just nodded like she didn't totally believe me. I stepped outside and the air felt heavy and still. I put on a World War II podcast with one earbud in and started down the main street toward my neighborhood. I wasn't looking for trouble, but late at night I keep my head up. Our college orientation was big on that, and my brother had always been right about it. About 5 minutes into the walk, I noticed a woman on the other side of the street going the same direction. Middle-aged, jeans, light-colored t-shirt, big bag over her shoulder. She wasn't talking on the phone, and she didn't look drunk or lost. I didn't stare, just clocked her and kept going, because plenty of people walk home from the campus area at weird hours. Then I turned onto a side street toward my place, one of the darker ones where half the streetlights don't work. The woman turned too, but she had to cross diagonally to do it. That was weird enough that I took my earbud out and sped up a little without thinking. A second later, she sped up too, keeping the gap the same. I tried not to spiral. I told myself she could live nearby and I was just being jumpy. Still, I stopped at a closed shop window and pretended to check my phone, like I had gotten a text. She stopped maybe 30 meters back, pulled out a cigarette, lit it, and stared right at me. No looking around, no pretending she wasn't watching. Just staring, like she was waiting for me to pick a direction. My heart started going fast. When I started walking again, she started walking again. I took a sharp turn onto the next street, picking a longer route that was better lit and closer to a few 24-hour stores. I kept glancing at reflections in windows to see how close she was, without fully turning around. She followed again, and this time she was walking faster, actually closing the distance. I broke into a quick walk that was basically a jog, aiming for the corner store that usually had at least somebody inside. When I got to the door, the lights were off, and there was a sign taped up, "Temporarily closed for inventory." I honestly felt stupid for relying on it as a safety plan, but it was the only thing in my head, and now it was gone. I turned back, and she had stopped at the corner about 10 meters away. She was looking straight at me, and she smiled wide. It wasn't friendly. Something about it was wrong, like she was enjoying me being stuck, and that was the moment I stopped making excuses for it. I remembered my brother's advice. If someone's following you, act like you're meeting people. So I pulled out my phone and started talking loud, faking a call. "Hey Jake. Yeah, I'm almost there. I can see your car. Where are you guys parked?" "Okay, coming over now." I nodded, laughed, acted like a natural conversation with imaginary friends. The woman's smile stopped instantly. She frowned and looked past me like she was checking if anyone was actually waiting. I kept talking into my phone, loud, and pointed down the block like I was heading toward friends. She stood there a few seconds, then turned around and walked back the way she came, fast, but not running at all. I didn't hang up the pretend call right away. I stayed where I was for a full minute, nodding like someone was giving me directions, because I didn't trust she was gone. Then I started walking the opposite way from my apartment, still talking, like I had somewhere else to be. Once she vanished, I crossed and took a route. I ended up choosing the city park, which I normally avoid after dark because everyone knows it's where people hang out to drink or do dumb stuff, and there had been muggings there before. But the paths have big security floodlights for the cameras, and I wanted light more than I wanted comfort. I kept my phone out, ready to dial, and moved fast without looking back once. Halfway through the park, I started telling myself I was being paranoid. I was thinking about how I'd sound if I explained it to anyone, like, a lady walked behind me, which is nothing. Then I heard quick footsteps behind me, not steady like a jogger. I turned my head and saw her again coming down the path behind me. She wasn't smoking now, and she wasn't drifting along like before. She was moving fast, like she'd decided she didn't care if I noticed. Her face was tight and focused, and she kept closing the gap. I didn't try to talk to her or ask questions. I just ran, full speed, toward the exit where the streetlights actually worked outside. I burst out onto a brighter street and saw a young couple getting into a parked car. One of them was half in the driver's seat, and the other was still by the door, like they were about to pull out. I ran up with my hands open, trying not to scare them. "Sorry," I said. "Can I stand here?" They both froze for a second. Then the guy said, "Yeah, okay," because I was shaking and I wasn't asking for money or anything. I told them, "Someone followed me from near campus," and I tried to keep my voice steady. The woman stepped out of the park entrance and stopped when she saw us together, about 20 meters away. She just stared, not moving closer, and then pulled out her phone and started typing without looking down. I couldn't tell if she was calling someone or taking pictures. I leaned in and asked, "Could you drive me a few blocks?" The girl didn't hesitate. "Get in," she said, and they both climbed in quick as I slid into back. As we pulled away, I kept watching through the rear window. She didn't chase the car. She stayed in the same spot with the phone in her hand, tracking us with her eyes until she was just a small shape under the light. They dropped me 5 blocks away, and I ran the rest home, checking behind me constantly afterward. Next day, I told Jessica, and she drove me home until my schedule moved to day shifts. I never found out what that woman wanted. I didn't call the cops. It felt dumb to report someone walking behind me. I bought a whistle and pepper spray the next morning. Sometimes I remember that smile and wonder what happens without them. When I saw those boot prints in the dust, leading straight to the doors where the grinding sounds were coming from, I knew we weren't alone in that building. They weren't old either, like the random marks we kept seeing everywhere. These were crisp tread lines from work boots, maybe a day old, and they cut through the powder like whoever made them didn't bother sweeping or hiding anything, just walked right in. The prints stopped at 2 side rooms off the hall, and both metal doors were cracked open a couple inches, enough to show pure black inside, while a loud scraping noise kept starting and stopping. First from the left room, then the right, like it was bouncing back and forth. Vince lifted his flashlight toward the left gap because he always had to know, and Dave put a hand on his arm like, "Seriously, don't." And I was halfway through saying we should just leave when the scraping suddenly got 10 times louder. Something heavy slammed into metal inside that room, hard enough to rattle the door, and all 3 of us did the exact same thing without talking. We backed up, turned, and ran for the stairs, boots sliding in dust, not stopping until we were outside in the heat. We jumped into Dave's truck, drove a short distance, and pulled over in a lot, and Vince kept whispering, "What was that?" while I tried to get my breathing under control, and then I realized none of this makes sense unless I start from the beginning. It was a Saturday afternoon in August 2019, and me, Vince, and Dave were all working for the same construction company in Phoenix, and on weekends we'd sometimes do urban exploration, mostly because we were bored and Vince liked taking photos of places nobody cared about anymore. He told us he'd heard about this old textile factory from the 70s that was scheduled to get demolished the following week. and he wanted one last walk through it for pictures. And honestly, it sounded harmless. Like the worst thing we'd deal with would be rusty nails. We were all around 24 to 26, grabbed some heavy-duty work lights from the shop around 2 p.m., threw extra batteries in a bag, and drove out toward the outskirts, where the factory sat spread out over about an acre with multiple warehouse buildings and covered walkways connecting them. Dave also tossed in his first aid kit from the job site, and I had gloves and a dust mask in my backpack, not because we were expecting trouble, but because abandoned places are full of sharp metal and dust, and none of us wanted to explain an infection at work Monday. The fencing was half-wrecked, the windows were mostly busted out, and there were clear spots where people had climbed in before, so we didn't feel like we were the first ones there. But it was still quiet and empty enough that we figured we could be in and out before sundown. Inside, the first floor looked exactly like every other closed-down factory you see online. Concrete floors buried in dust, broken equipment scattered around, and shattered windows letting in stripes of afternoon light. And Vince was immediately snapping pictures of rusted machines like it was a museum. Me and Dave hung back, doing the practical stuff we do at work, tapping areas with our boots, watching for soft spots, and staying off anything that looked like it might drop. Because the only thing worse than getting caught trespassing is getting hurt while doing it. After a while, we found a concrete staircase tucked behind some old piping, and we went up. And the second floor was a long hallway with paint peeling off in big sheets, leading straight toward what used to be the storage area where they kept the fabric rolls before shipping. At the end of the hallway, the air felt warmer, and the dust looked disturbed, and Vince finally stopped joking, because even he could tell we were heading into the part of the building nobody visited very often. That's where we found those 3 metal doors at the far end. One of the 3 doors at the end of that hallway opened into a room with a rusted electrical panel. The cover was bent, the switches were missing, and it was a dead end. We closed it and looked at the other 2 doors, which sat feet apart like closets. That's when the boot prints clicked in my brain. Tread marks, clear in the dust, coming straight down the hall and stopping at those 2 doors. No prints around them, no scuffs circling the area, just a direct path to each crack. Vince said it was probably the demolition crew doing a last inspection. Dave didn't argue, but he didn't look convinced either. Both doors were slightly open, maybe 5 centimeters. I aimed my work light at the gaps and got nothing but black. Vince tried from the side with his flashlight, same result. The room swallowed the light like there was something big blocking it, or like the layout turned immediately. We stood there, not moving, and I remember thinking this was when we should turn around. Then we heard a scraping noise, loud and steady, like someone dragging a heavy chain across concrete. It stopped. We all froze. A few seconds later it started again, but it was coming from the other side room. It wasn't random either. It was almost like someone was pacing, switching rooms, or pulling something back and forth to make sure we heard it. Dave cranked his work light brighter and pointed it right at both doors, but the beam still didn't reach far enough to show us what was inside. Right after the scraping, a low mechanical hum started up, followed by electrical crackling. It sounded like an old generator trying to wake up, the kind we use on jobs when the power's out. That made my stomach tighten because we hadn't seen any working lines in the building, and nobody had mentioned power being on. Vince leaned closer and said, "Hello?" Like we were in somebody's garage and not trespassing in a condemned factory. The scraping came back, faster, and Vince took a step forward, then another. He said, "Just let me see it," and pointed his flashlight straight into the left doorway. The second his beam hit that crack, the noise jumped to maybe 10 times the volume. Something huge slammed or fell against metal inside the room, hard enough to make the door shudder. The sound bounced off the walls and came back at us, and we all jumped like idiots. I grabbed Vince by the shoulder and yanked him backward, and Dave was already turning toward the stairs. We ran. No arguing, no, maybe it's nothing, just straight down the concrete steps. Our lights swung everywhere, and I almost tripped on a chunk of broken equipment, catching myself on the railing and forcing my feet to keep moving. By the time we hit the first floor, the hum and scraping had stopped completely. That silence was worse than the noise, because it felt like whoever was up there had just decided to go quiet. We didn't slow down until we were outside at the truck, bent over and breathing hard, hands on our knees. Looking back, the part that sticks with me is how fast it went from joking around to real danger, and how those fresh prints meant somebody else had been planning something in there. We just stared at each other, waiting for one of us to say the logical explanation out loud, and trying to process what the hell just happened. Last spring, I was working as a route manager for a small tourism company specializing in hiking in national parks, and my job often required trips to scout new trails, check safety, assess difficulty, photograph key points for future brochures. I'm Jennifer, 30, a route manager, and mid-May I was coming back from a 3-day trail inspection about 200 kilometers from home. I left the base camp around 9 p.m., thinking I'd be in my apartment by midnight. I was tired, but it was a familiar 2-lane road. About 40 minutes in, the last real town was behind me. After that, it was mostly forest, scattered farms, and the odd gas station. My phone signal dropped out. I had my satellite phone in my pack for emergencies, but I didn't want to use it unless I had to. Around 10:30, my headlights hit an old dark blue Ford truck on the shoulder, hood up, white steam rolling out. Next to it stood a man, maybe 40, in a heavy winter jacket even though it was about 18 degrees. He waved both arms high over his head, like he was trying to flag down anything with wheels. My first thought was, keep going. Second thought was, if that was me, I'd want someone to at least call help. I slowed down and stopped about 10 meters past his truck. I kept the engine on and lowered my window just a few centimeters. I asked if he needed help and if I could call a tow truck. He came toward my car fast. In the headlights, I saw unshaven stubble, dirty hair, jeans with engine oil stains, and a twitch under his right eye. He started mumbling about a broken radiator, no mobile coverage, and needing to get to the nearest town because his brother was sick. What bothered me wasn't the story. It was the way he acted. His hands shook, but not like he was cold. His eyes kept jumping from my face to the inside of my car, like he was counting how many people were with me. He asked for a ride immediately. I told him, I can call road service. I have a phone that works out here. I even said it twice, like maybe he just hadn't heard me. He didn't say thank you. He just took another step closer and asked again, give me a ride. His voice got firmer, like he was done asking. I said no, sorry. I was going the opposite direction, and I was late. I offered the tow again, and reached toward my bag so he'd see I was serious. He asked why I had that phone, and it didn't sound like small talk. I stayed polite, but I was already scanning his hands and my door handle. His face changed in a second. The pleading look dropped and irritation took over. He stepped right up, put his hand on my door handle, and pulled, testing if it was locked. Then he pulled again, harder. I hit the gas. The car lurched forward, and I heard him shout something aggressive and profane behind me. I didn't look back, just accelerated until I was doing 100. My heart was pounding so hard it made my hands shake on the wheel. I drove another 25 kilometers before I saw a 24-hour gas station with a small store, all lit up. I turned in and parked right by the entrance under the lamps. I turned off the engine and sat there, breathing through it, checking my mirrors, telling myself the important thing was that he hadn't gotten in. I checked all my doors were still locked, then moved my car a little so it was in front of the window, where the cashier could see me. There were cameras on the corners of the building and other cars fueling up, which helped. I kept my keys in my hand like that would matter. I looked at the road for a full minute. half expecting to see headlights flying in behind me any second. Inside, I bought a bottle of water and a chocolate bar, just to have something normal to do. I asked the cashier if there was a phone. I called road service and reported a broken dark blue Ford truck about 40 kilometers back, hood up, steam coming out. The dispatcher, a woman, said she'd send help within an hour and asked if I needed assistance. I told her no, I was okay. I drove home, and the farther I got, the more my brain tried to edit it into something harmless. Maybe he was stranded back there. Maybe he was scared. I kept telling myself I overreacted and seemed rude and heartless to him. The next few days passed normally. I went back to work, planned summer hiking routes, and told myself I'd just been tired and jumpy after 3 days in the mountains. I didn't tell anyone at the office. It sounded dumb when nothing happened besides a guy testing a locked door. Exactly a week later, I saw a local news report that made me go cold. County police had arrested Daryl Thompson, 38, suspected of a series of armed attacks on lone drivers on that same 2-lane road over the past 3 months. They showed his mugshot, and I recognized him immediately. Then they showed an old, dark blue Ford being towed with the hood up. Same color, same shape, hood up. The report said his trick was simple. He parked the Ford like it had overheated and set off a smoke bomb under the hood so white steam rolled out. He waved people down and asked for help. If a driver opened the door or stepped out, he pulled a knife, threatened them, and took cash, phones, and whatever else he could grab. 2 drivers were hospitalized with stab wounds after resisting. Another ended up with a concussion. A middle-aged woman stopped 3 weeks earlier and never made it home. Her car was found abandoned in the woods, and she still hasn't been found. 2 days later, a detective called my cell during lunch. "Jennifer, this is Detective Harris with the county police," he said. He asked if I could come in to give a statement about the disabled truck report. I took a half day and drove to the station. Harris had me walk through everything: time, location, what the man said about a sick brother, and what I noticed about his behavior. I described the winter jacket in warm weather, the oil-stained jeans, the twitch under his right eye, and how his eyes kept scanning my back seat like he was checking for witnesses. Then he pulled up a photo from their database. "Is this him?" he asked. It was him, no doubt. So I said yes. Harris was blunt about it. He said my caution probably saved my life, and if I'd opened the door, gotten out, or let him inside, I would almost certainly have been another victim. He told me Thompson was a drug addict with a long criminal history, including 2 robberies and an assault with a weapon, and he'd been out on parole for only 4 months. That hit me later than I expected. For weeks, I couldn't sleep normally. I'd wake up from the same nightmare where I unlock the door to be polite, and a man with a knife rushes in. During the day, I kept replaying the shoulder in my head, stuck on little variables like my lock button failing or my window being lower. Around that same time, my rented apartment started having electrical issues. Light bulbs in my bedroom burned out every 3 or 4 days. The clock on my nightstand reset and showed the wrong time, and my laptop drained faster than it should. I called an electrician named George, an older guy who'd worked these buildings for 30 years. He removed a few outlets, checked the wiring with a tester, and measured voltage at different points. He found sections where insulation was worn and copper was nearly bare. He said humidity changes could make those spots short out, and it was a real fire hazard, especially at night. Now I avoid that road, take the well-lit highway, tell someone my travel plan from now on, and I never stop for strangers no matter how helpless they seem. When I saw the steaming coffee on the counter of that empty gas station, I knew someone had been there maybe a minute ago, but the entire town was dead silent. 2 weeks ago, me, David, and Martha were driving to a corporate training session about managing staff. We all worked for the same retail chain, and our district manager sent us like it was mandatory school. It was early Saturday morning, maybe 6:30 a.m. when we left. The training started at 9 sharp and registration closed at 9, so we couldn't be late. David drove. I rode shotgun. Martha sat in the back, already scrolling through emails like that was going to help. About an hour and a half into the drive, the GPS started beeping with an alert. Massive accident ahead on the main highway, semi-truck involved, estimated delay 90 minutes. The app offered a detour through back roads that would actually save us time. We agreed immediately. Missing registration meant missing the whole training, and none of us wanted to explain that on Monday. For the first 20 minutes, the detour looked normal. Gas stations, diners, billboards, the usual stuff you see when you're off the interstate but still near it. Then things started getting weird. The road got worse, potholes everywhere, and the painted lines faded until there were just chunks of old yellow. The signs just disappeared. Instead of normal highway markers, there were these old wooden posts with nothing on them, like someone removed all the plates. David slowed down without saying it, and the car got quiet. Martha leaned forward and held up her phone. "My map is blank," she said. The GPS still showed our location as a blue dot, but everything around it was white space. No road names, no town names, nothing. It wasn't frozen either. The dot kept moving as we moved, like the app knew where we were but didn't want to show it. David said, "Probably a dead zone," but he tightened his grip on the wheel. I tried joking, but it sounded wrong anyway. After another 10 minutes, we saw rooftops ahead, and I felt relieved in that dumb automatic way. We drove into a small town and passed a sign that said, "Milford, established 1923, population 1,847. It was around 8 a.m. on a Saturday. The main street had traffic lights, storefronts, a post office, and a couple of police cars parked along the curb. But there wasn't a single person anywhere. No moving cars, no open doors, no one sitting on a bench. It looked like everyone had stepped inside at the same time and never came back out. But everything was running. The traffic lights kept changing on schedule. Lights were on behind some office windows. You could hear air conditioners humming if you stood still. David pulled into a gas station because the pumps were lit up green with an open sign and the price display was flashing. He tried the door to the convenience store. Locked. Inside, the lights were on, shelves stocked, and on the counter was an open coffee can with steam still rising from it. Not warm, actual steam. I just stared at it and said, someone was literally here. Martha didn't answer, which is when I realized she was scared too. I walked over to one of the police cars, an old Crown Victoria, and looked inside. The radio was playing, low but clear. There was a half-empty coffee cup on the seat and a donut next to it, still soft, not dried out. I knocked on the window like that would wake someone up. Nothing. Martha crossed to a supermarket, and the automatic doors opened when we approached, letting us into an empty store. The checkout lanes were lit up, and background music was playing. She called out, "Hello?" like you do when you walk into a place and don't see anyone. Her voice sounded wrong in there, too loud for how normal everything looked. I pulled out my phone to record the GPS coordinates, because I needed proof that this wasn't just us being dramatic, and I tried calling 911. It rang, but nobody answered. We did not just stand there staring at the coffee and the donut. After my 911 call rang out, we agreed to start checking buildings. David said, "If someone is hurt, we will not find them by waiting." So we walked the main street and knocked on any door close. Martha was freaking out. She kept saying it was like a horror movie, then saying she hated that she had even thought that. She wanted to leave right away. David insisted there had to be a reason, maybe an evacuation or chemical leak. I tried to keep them both calm. I pulled out my phone to record, because I needed proof, and also because I thought the act of filming would steady my hands. The camera app opened, froze, and crashed. On the third try, my phone restarted. Martha's phone died completely. David's camera showed only white static on screen. We still stayed, maybe an hour, because leaving without understanding felt wrong, and we kept thinking we would find one person. The post office lights were on, and stamped envelopes sat on the counter. At the bank, a teller drawer was open, and the keypad screen waited for input again. 2 cafes were worse. One had a fresh pot of coffee and a card reader asking to remove a chip card. The other had plates on tables like someone had just stood up. The pharmacy had a computer logged in and a bottle of pills half counted in a tray. Martha kept moving faster, like if she stopped she would lose it. She tried calling out again and her voice cracked. Then she started yelling, loud enough that it echoed between buildings, that she could not take it anymore. David finally said, "Okay, we go. Now. No more. We leave." We got back in the car and drove out the same way we came in. At the edge of town, I saw the Milford sign again. The population number had been crossed out with thick marker, and someone had written a 0 over it. It looked fresh, not sun-faded. About 30 minutes later, we hit a main road and found a normal gas station with people and noise. My phone had service again, so I called the local sheriff office number. An older deputy met us outside, listened, and kept shaking his head like he had heard this before. He said there was no Milford in his jurisdiction. He told us the only thing near those coordinates was a textile factory that shut down 20 years ago, and the housing nearby got bulldozed. I showed him the coordinates I saved. He shrugged and said he would check during patrol. We still went to the training because we were late and we needed something normal. The HR manager met us at registration and demanded an explanation for why we were 2 hours behind. We said we got lost and the GPS failed. She marked us late anyway and moved on. A week later, we drove back using the coordinates I saved. The GPS took us to the spot, but there was only a half-destroyed brick factory and an empty field of weeds. No houses, no streets, no stores. We stood there a minute, then got back in the car. After that, we never talked about it at work. No jokes, no theories, nothing in texts. It was like saying it out loud might make it real again. But sometimes, across the office or on the floor, I would catch David's eyes or Martha's, and we both knew we remembered. I was working as a cashier at a 24-hour gas station on the edge of town for about 8 months when this happened. My shift ran from midnight to 8 a.m. I did not love it, but the pay was steady, and I could study between customers. After 3 in the morning, it was usually quiet, just a trucker, a nurse, or a guy grabbing cigarettes. I'm a woman, and I sat in the booth behind the glass, kept my book open, and watched the cameras. Overnight was always one person, me, and that was normal there until that night. In 3 years of the place being open, nothing worse than a shoplifter had happened. We had bright lights outside, cameras, and a panic button under the counter that called the security company and police. They told us to press it if anything felt wrong. I never had. That night, at about 3:20, the bell over the door chimed and I looked up. A man in his 40s came in, unshaven, denim jacket, ripped jeans. He scanned the store fast, then went to the energy drink cooler and grabbed a can. He did not head to the counter to pay. Instead, he stood by the shelves like he was thinking, but he was not reading anything. His eyes kept jumping to my booth, then to the back hallway, then back to me. After a minute, he walked up and set the drink down. He pulled out his phone and showed me the dead screen. "My battery is dead," he said. "Can I come back there with you to charge it? I need to call my wife. She is waiting." His voice sounded practiced, like he had said it before. I kept hands on the counter so he could see them. I told him, "I cannot let anyone into the cashier area. That is a rule." I pointed to the coin charging station on the sales floor. "You can use that." He looked at it, then at me. "No change," he said. I offered to break a bill if he bought the drink. He went silent and just stared. He was not looking at my face. He was looking past me at the register, the cigarette rack, and the little door into my booth. Then he asked again, slower, "Make an exception." I shook my head and repeated, "No, I cannot." He did not argue. He shoved the energy drink across the counter like he wanted it to bounce, then turned and walked out. The door slammed hard enough to make the chime rattle. Through the window, I watched him cross the lot to an old red pickup parked by the far pump. He opened the tailgate and started digging through the bed. He kept glancing back toward the store, like he wanted to check if I was watching. My hand slid under the counter to the panic button. I did not press it yet, but I was ready right then. About 90 seconds later, the door flew open again and he came in fast. This time he carried a red plastic gas can, the small 5-liter kind. The smell of gasoline hit the room right away. He walked straight to my booth and raised his voice. "You will regret it," he said. "Open the register, or I pour this on the floor, and we will see how you like working in a fire." He was already twisting the cap loose and holding the can at his chest. I could see eyes dart to the door, then back to me. I did not wait. I hit the panic button and the red light over the entrance started flashing. He saw it and swore, then tilted the can anyway. A few drops fell onto the linoleum by the base of the glass. I turned and ran to the back room, straight for the service door that leads outside by the dumpsters. He shouted something after me, words I could not understand. Then there was a loud impact. It bounced, slid down, and hit the floor behind me, and I knew he'd thrown the canister at the protective glass, but it held. I burst out through the service exit into the cold night air and ran. I cut around the building and down the shoulder toward the 7-Eleven about 100 meters away. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and my hands were shaking. I kept thinking he might follow, or that the place might go up behind me, but I didn't look back. When I hit the 7-Eleven door, the chime went off, and the night clerk, an older man named Carl, looked up and immediately came out from behind his counter. I was gasping and couldn't speak. He sat me on a chair behind the counter, handed me water, and said, "Okay, slow down. You're safe." After a few swallows, I managed, "Man at my station has a gas can. He threatened to burn the store." Carl grabbed the phone, called 911, and told the dispatcher my panic button call should already be coming in too. He kept talking, so I breathed. Then he told me not to move and stayed close, like he didn't want me alone. The security company arrived in 6 minutes. 2 guards came in, both with batons and pepper spray on their belts, and Carl pointed through the windows toward my gas station. One of them asked, "Is he still there?" And I said I didn't know. I ran the second he spilled gas. They went out fast, and Carl told me again to stay with him until the police got there. Police came about 3 minutes after that, 2 patrol cars with lights flashing. The officers spoke to Carl first. Then one leaned in and asked me quick questions. Did he touch me? Did he have a weapon? Did he say he would light it? I answered no, I didn't see one, and yes. They headed out with the guards. Later, an officer came back and said they found the man still on the gas station property, sitting on the asphalt by the pump with his head in his hands, talking loud to himself. The canister was nearby and almost empty. He'd poured most of the gasoline on the pavement in front of the entrance but hadn't lit it, and the officer said that he didn't have a lighter. Another officer said the guy was clearly high, and later they told me it was methamphetamine. They arrested him on the spot. The station got shut down until morning for ventilation and cleanup of the spilled fuel. I gave my statement in the 7-Eleven parking lot. Wrapped in a blanket, a paramedic handed me while they checked my pulse and asked if I felt dizzy. They finally let me go home around 5 a.m. The station owner called later, apologized a bunch, and gave me a week of paid leave. I went back after that week and lasted 2 more weeks. But every time the door opened around 3 in the morning, I'd flinch and grab my phone like it could help. Eventually, I quit because I couldn't handle being alone at night anymore, always expecting a repeat. I still don't know what would have happened if I hadn't pressed that button so fast, or if he'd had a lighter on him. The thing that gets me is how calm I was in the moment, like my brain just went into survival mode and moved my hand without asking permission. Only after, sitting in Carl's store wrapped in that blanket, did I start shaking and crying. Took me months to stop having nightmares about the smell of gasoline. So, when I was 22, I was working full-time at my family's winery after dropping out of college. This was 5 years ago, October 2019, and winemaking had been our family business for 3 generations. A small operation in the valley selling to local restaurants and shops. We had about 12 acres, a main building with a tasting room, and an old stone cellar where we aged wine in oak barrels. The cellar was underground, built by my great-grandfather, with thick stone walls and a heavy wooden door that made it basically soundproof from outside. That October evening around 7, after most of the workers had gone home, my dad asked me to go down and check the barrels in the back of the cellar. It was Reserve Cabernet from the previous year, and it should have been on track for bottling in about a month. Dad was busy with paperwork and a distributor call, so he just said, "Do the notes and tell me if anything looks off." I grabbed a flashlight because the lighting in the far part of the cellar was dim thanks to old wiring. I left my phone in the office upstairs because there was no signal down there anyway, and I didn't want it getting wet or dropped. I took my notebook and headed down the stone steps. I'd done the routine 100 times, and it usually took 20 minutes. Nothing about it felt risky at all. I was thinking about closing up and heading out, nothing else yet. The cellar was laid out in long rows, barrels on both sides, a narrow path down the middle, and then a wider space at the very back where we kept the stuff we didn't show during tours. I pushed the heavy door open, stepped inside, and pulled it shut behind me. The hinge always groaned, and I remember thinking, like I always did, that I should grease it. I started checking the taps and levels, writing down numbers, moving row by row. It was quiet besides my footsteps and that constant drip from a pipe we never fully fixed. I was halfway through when I heard a sound. It was shuffling, like someone shifting their feet on the stone floor, trying to move quietly. I froze with my pen hovering over the page. My first thought was rats, because rodents got in sometimes through vents, but it was too heavy for that. It sounded like a person. And then it stopped, like whoever made it noticed I'd stopped too. I pointed my flashlight between the barrels and called out, "Hello?" Then I added, "Dad, is that you?" Because that was the easiest explanation, and I really wanted it to be true. No answer. Just the drip and my own breathing. I waited, then said louder, "If someone's down here, say something." Still nothing. For a few seconds, I stood there listening so hard it felt like my ears were buzzing. I told myself I was hearing things and kept moving toward the back, but I picked up the pace. I suddenly wanted to be done and back upstairs where the lights were bright and there were other people around. When I reached the back barrels, the flashlight beam barely cut through the darkness between them. I crouched, checked the first one, wrote the reading down, and I heard it again. This time it was obvious movement, quick breathing, and then quiet whispering like someone talking to themselves in short, unclear phrases. My heart started hammering because there was no way that was an animal. Someone was definitely in the cellar, hiding in the gaps and corners. I spun around and swept the flashlight across the far wall and behind the last row. For 1 second, before the beam moved, I saw a silhouette. Tall figure, dark clothing, standing between the last barrels by the wall. As soon as the light hit them, they stepped back into a darker corner where the flashlight couldn't reach. I swore and yelled, "Hey, who's here? You're on private property." My voice echoed off the stone and came back at me, which honestly made it worse. The whispering started again, still unintelligible, like the person was talking but refusing to answer me. Even now, 5 years later, I can remember how fast my brain did the math. I didn't have my phone. Nobody could hear me through those walls. The only way out was the steps behind me, and between me and that door was a long stretch of narrow aisle with barrels on both sides. I realized I was in an enclosed space with an unknown person acting extremely suspicious. No phone, nobody to call, thick walls wouldn't let a scream through, and the only exit was behind me. I didn't wait around. I dropped my notebook, turned, and ran toward the stairs as fast as the narrow aisle between barrels would let me. I clipped my shoulder on a rack and almost ate it, but I kept moving because that breathing was still back there, and I couldn't tell if the person was coming after me or just standing in the dark. I hit the steps, shoved the heavy door open, and ran outside. My dad was under the spotlight by the building, fixing the water pump. I didn't ease into it. I just blurted, "Dad, there's someone in the cellar." I heard footsteps, breathing, whispering, and I saw a tall silhouette in the back. I was out of breath and talking too fast. Dad didn't argue. He put his tools down, went to the truck, and grabbed a metal flashlight and a baseball bat. We'd had theft attempts before, so he treated it like a real thing. He handed me my phone and said, "Go upstairs by the office. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, call the police. Don't come down." I went inside and waited where I could see the cellar door, phone in my hand, watching the clock. I was still shaking. Right around 20 minutes later, the door opened and my dad came up. He looked annoyed, but more than that, he looked confused. "I didn't find anybody," he said. I started to insist I wasn't imagining it, and he cut me off with, "I believe you. I checked every corner." Then he told me what he did find. An old ventilation hatch in the far wall near the last barrels, partly hidden, leading into the neighboring warehouse basement next door. We went back down together. The hatch was covered in cobwebs and dust like it hadn't been touched in years, but the screws were scratched up and one was loose. It was tight, but if someone was desperate and thin enough, they could squeeze through. Dad shined his light through and we could see concrete on the other side. He checked the neighboring basement right after. The warehouse door was slightly open and the lock was broken, metal bent like it had been forced. Inside was empty, but it was the kind of empty where someone could be there 1 minute and gone the next. When he came back, he said, "If someone was down there, they heard me and left through the hatch." The next day, we called the police. An officer checked both spaces, didn't find a person or any clear signs of someone staying there, but he confirmed the warehouse lock looked recently broken. He said it was probably someone using the place as temporary shelter, maybe someone on drugs, which would explain the whispering and why they wouldn't answer me. He recommended a security camera, a coded lock on the cellar door, and sealing the hatch. Dad did it all within a week, and the neighboring building got fixed and locked properly once the owner was notified. Since that night, I don't go down into the cellar alone, especially in the evening. I'll wait until someone's with me, or I'll keep my work in the main lit area, and nobody fights me on it. Even now, 5 years later, when I drive past and see that heavy door with the keypad, I remember the silhouette and the whispering by the far wall, and I speed up and prefer not to think about who was hiding there that October night and what could have happened if I hadn't run. Way back after my divorce went through, I moved into this small first-floor apartment in an old house built in 1954. Lawyers took all my savings, and my ex got the house in the split, so I needed something cheap fast. The place was tiny, but it had high ceilings, wood floors, and big windows with good light. The floors creaked, but I liked it, because it reminded me of my grandmother's house. I signed the lease on a Thursday, and moved in that weekend with 2 friends helping. We hauled boxes, argued over couch, and pretended it was fine. The first week was actually nice. I work from home, so I could set up my laptop at the little kitchen counter and just stay put. I enjoyed the quiet and being alone, which is not something I expected to say after a divorce. I tried not to think about the past or call my ex, even when I caught myself reaching for my phone. I unpacked slowly, ate basic meals, and kept telling myself that boring was good. Nothing happened, and I started to relax. Then the second week started, and I noticed I was listening harder at night. One night around midnight, I was in bed reading when I heard a sound from the living room. Scratching, quiet but clear, like someone scraping fingernails on wood from below, under the floor. I sat up and waited for it to stop, but it kept going in a steady rhythm. It was coming from the same corner where my couch was. I got up, walked out there, and flipped on the light. The sound stopped immediately. I stood there in my socks, staring at the floorboards, feeling stupid and tense. After a minute, I went back to bed, telling myself, rodents. The next day, I bought mouse traps and set them along the baseboards in the living room. I moved the couch out and checked behind it like I was going to find a hole or droppings. Nothing. I set the traps anyway and tried to forget about it. I didn't catch anything for a week, but the scratching kept happening every 2 or 3 days, always late between midnight and 2 a.m., always from that corner. It wasn't random. It was persistent, almost methodical, and it got on my nerves in a way I couldn't explain. I slept with TV on. After it happened again, I called my landlady, Carol. She's older and sounds tired on the phone, but she's always polite. I told her I kept hearing scratching under the floor and asked about the basement. She said it was locked and mostly full of old things left behind, boxes and furniture from previous tenants nobody ever came back for. She added she hadn't gone down in 5 years or more because her knees wouldn't let her, but she could give me the key to check for rodents if I wanted. I said no thanks. I didn't want to go. The scratching continued and soon the nightmares started. I never had bad dreams much. Even during the worst of the divorce, I slept fine, just heavy and long. Now the nightmares came every night, always the same. I'm in the apartment. I hear the sound under the floor. I get on my knees and try to lift a board, and underneath is darkness and something is moving there, reaching. I woke up sweating with my heart racing, and after that I felt this pressure in the room, like someone was watching from the corner. I drank coffee late and crashed. By the 3rd week, I was scared to go to sleep, so I finally admitted it out loud. I called Jessica and told her I wasn't sleeping well, that I kept hearing the sound under the floor, and I was starting to dread being alone in the apartment. Saying it to someone else made it sound smaller, like it should be fixable, and I hated that I needed reassurance like a kid. She didn't laugh, and she didn't panic. She came over with wine and pizza, said I just had stress from the divorce and new place, needed to relax. We sat in the living room until about 1 a.m., Jessica on the rug and me on the couch. We talked about normal stuff, work, her new boyfriend, my plans, like repainting the bathroom and maybe taking a class so I didn't feel like my life was just divorce paperwork. I remember thinking I was finally calm. Then the scratching started. Not the faint stuff I'd been trying to blame on mice. This was loud and insistent, right under us, like something scraping hard across wood. Jessica stopped mid-sentence and stared at me. "You hear that?" she whispered. I nodded. We sat still and listened. Scrape, scrape, pause, scrape. It didn't move around the room. Same spot by the couch. Jessica stood up first. "Let's move it and look," she said. She grabbed one arm of the couch and I grabbed the other. We shoved it together, and I flashed back to how I dragged it in alone during the move and almost threw up from effort. When it finally shifted, the sound stopped again, like it always did when I went looking. Under the couch, one floorboard didn't sit tight with the others. The edges were worn, like it had been lifted and put back. Jessica turned on her phone flashlight. I squatted down and tried to pry the board up with my nails. It lifted easily, and that made my stomach drop. I blurted, "Carol said the basement's locked." Like that explained anything. Jessica didn't look up. "This isn't the basement. This is your floor," she said. I leaned back, like the gap might grab me. I hated thinking of the dreams. Underneath was empty space, maybe a foot deep, the gap between my floor and the basement ceiling. Dust and cobwebs. Tucked back in there was a faded canvas bag tied shut with rough rope. It didn't look like something that slid there by accident. It looked hidden. I pulled it out. It was heavier than it looked, like 3 or 4 kilos. My hands shook when I untied the rope. Inside were things. An old pair of adult shoes, faded photos of people in 1980s clothes, a notebook with yellow pages, and several letters in envelopes. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with any of it. I opened the notebook first. It was a diary, shaky feminine handwriting, entries dated 1987 to 1989. I read the first line out loud without meaning to. "They're watching me. They come when I sleep. They want to take everything I hold dear." Jessica's eyes went wide. I flipped through pages and it got more paranoid and scattered. All fear and suspicion. Always them, but never names. The last page said, "If you find this, destroy it. Don't let them take it. Hide it deeper." I sat there holding it, trying to decide if this was mental illness, abuse, or both. Jessica looked at me and said quietly, "We need to throw this out right now." I agreed. Something about these things felt wrong, not supernatural, just human and dark. We put everything back in the bag and tied it with the same rope. We went downstairs and threw it in the dumpster behind the house, deep under other garbage bags. Back upstairs, we nailed the board down. Jessica found a hammer in my toolbox, and we hammered the board to the neighboring one so it wouldn't lift. Then we pushed the couch back and finished the wine without talking about it. That night I slept peacefully for the first time in 3 weeks. No sounds, no nightmares. Two years ago, I was working at an auto parts warehouse in the industrial zone of Detroit. I was 22. My coworker Jason was 23, and we usually worked regular day shifts. It was normal warehouse stuff, and I was there for the paycheck. We'd both been there a few months, and the older guys warned us the lot got sketchy after hours. They meant scrappers and break-ins, not ghosts. One night in late November, our manager asked us to stay until 11 p.m. because there was an unexpected delivery coming from Canada that needed to be processed urgently. We agreed for double pay since we both needed the money. The manager stayed with us, but he just sat in the office doing paperwork, while me and Jason handled the actual unloading. Every so often he'd lean out and say, "Let me know if you need me," which meant nothing. Our company only rented one building in this warehouse complex. The rest of the buildings had been empty for over a year. The whole area was probably around an acre with several structures scattered around. After dark, there were no other workers, and the empty buildings made the lot feel bigger than it was. Most of them still had pallets and busted docks inside. If someone was moving around out there, our building wouldn't catch it. Earlier around 8 p.m., before the truck arrived, me and Jason had walked the perimeter checking all the gates, because sometimes drivers got confused, and we had to direct them to the right entrance. It was supposed to be quick. We checked the main gate, then the side one by the far building. Jason pointed at a dark warehouse and said, "You know someone's probably sleeping in there," and I told him to quit it. The truck showed up around 10 p.m., and we got the pallets unloaded pretty quickly, moved all the boxes into our warehouse. The driver waited while the manager checked documentation and signed forms. I went to grab my locker keys and realized I'd lost them somewhere. My jacket with my wallet and ID was locked in there, so it wasn't something I could ignore and deal with later. I tried to play it off, but losing them made me feel trapped. My wallet was in there, and my ID too. Jason shook his head and said, "Just cut the lock. he was tired and wanted to go. I told him no, I wasn't paying for repairs, and I wasn't giving the manager a reason to write me up. Then I remembered that perimeter walk and felt stupid, because I could picture the keys slipping out when I was messing with my gloves. Jason said he'd help me look after he washed up, and I said I'd do a quick check outside first. Around midnight, the manager finished with the paperwork and left, telling us to lock up and set the alarm when we were done. Jason went to wash up in the shower room. I grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight and walked along the fence toward the empty warehouse that hadn't been used in over a year. It was dark and quiet, just wind pushing trash across the asphalt, and I kept thinking about how I was doing all this because I couldn't keep track of a key ring. Near the loading dock of the far building, I saw something strange on the concrete pad. There was an unrolled army green sleeping bag, dirty and worn, with cigarette butts scattered around it and an empty whiskey bottle lying nearby. Someone had clearly been here very recently, maybe was even still hiding somewhere close. I remember my brain doing this quick math like, okay, if someone's been camping here, then they've been watching the place too. Even now, the part that keeps looping in my head is how I froze instead of turning back. I aimed my flashlight further along the wall and froze. Behind a stack of old wooden pallets about 15 meters away, a large dark figure rose up. A man, judging by the silhouette, tall and broad-shouldered. He just stood there staring directly at me. We stayed motionless for several seconds, me pointing the flashlight beam right at him, but I couldn't make out his face because it was in shadow. Then I started backing away slowly, keeping the light on him. The man took a step forward, and I saw he was holding something long in his hand, like a metal pipe or a piece of rebar. My heart dropped into my stomach. I turned and started walking quickly back toward the lit entrance of our warehouse, trying not to run so I wouldn't trigger a chase response. Within seconds, I heard heavy footsteps running behind me. He was coming after me full speed. I broke into a sprint and the flashlight bounced all over the place because my arm was shaking. I cut between dumpsters and piles of debris, trying to keep a straight line toward our door. I forced myself not to look back more than once, because every time I did, he seemed closer. I wanted to scream for Jason, but my lungs were already burning. The guy was faster than me and closing the distance. I could hear his breathing getting louder, like he was right behind my shoulder, and I could hear that pipe clink when it hit something on his side. I aimed for a narrow gap between two big metal dumpsters because it was the shortest path to the entrance lights. That's when my foot caught a low crate I hadn't seen. I tripped and fell hard, sliding into the space between the dumpsters. The flashlight flew out of my hand, hit the concrete, and went dead. I pressed myself against the cold dumpster wall and held my breath. His footsteps thundered right past me, then stopped. I could hear him breathing in the dark, and he was standing maybe 2 meters away, trying to figure out where I'd gone. I stayed frozen, face turned toward the metal. What felt like forever passed, probably just a minute or two. Then metal scraped against asphalt as he dragged that pipe around. The scraping moved a few steps, paused, then the footsteps finally started again, slow at first, then moving away. I waited a little longer, then carefully crawled out and ran straight to our warehouse without looking back. I burst through the door and locked it behind me, fumbling the latch because my hands were shaking. Jason came out of the shower room with his hair wet, looking annoyed until he saw my face. I said, "There's a guy out there, he chased me." And Jason grabbed his phone while I checked the side door and hit the panic button on the alarm panel. We called the police. They showed up about 15 minutes later with dogs, searched the lot and the empty buildings, but they didn't find anyone. The only thing they found was that army green sleeping bag, and it wasn't where I'd first seen it, like somebody had dragged it closer to the fence. After that incident, the company hired a night security guard and installed cameras around the perimeter. I kept working there, but I stopped agreeing to late nights unless the guard was on duty, and the manager stayed until we left. Even with the cameras, I caught myself staring at the dark buildings whenever I took the trash out, listening for steps that didn't match mine. I still don't know who that guy was, or what he planned to do with that pipe, and it bothers me that he was comfortable enough to sleep on our dock like it was his place. So last fall, I was renting this ground floor apartment in Austin from an elderly widow who lived upstairs and barely came down because of her knees. I'm a woman in my late 20s, and after 2 messy roommate setups, having my own place felt like a reset. I worked from home doing graphic design, so the quiet mattered more than the location. For the first few weeks, nothing happened. She stayed upstairs, I stayed downstairs, and we kept it friendly but distant. If I heard her TV, I'd just turn up my headphones and tried not to overthink it. Late September on a Thursday, I got back from grocery shopping around 6 and found a big Amazon Prime box right at my door. I hadn't ordered anything in days, but mistakes happen here all the time. Our street is older, the house numbers don't line up, and drivers get lazy. I carried it inside, stared at the label, and then decided to bring it upstairs so there was no question later. The landlady opened her door in a robe and sighed like I was bothering her. She squinted through glasses, saw the address was right, and said, "Call Amazon." The label name wasn't mine, and it wasn't hers either. It said, Sarah Wilson, plain as day, with our exact address under it. I remember her muttering, "That's not anyone here," like she was irritated the world didn't run clean. I went back downstairs and called Amazon customer service. I explained that it was delivered correctly, but nobody by that name lived in the house. The rep acted like it was normal and told me to hand it back to the next courier. I set it by the entryway, figured the mistake would fix itself, and went back to work. 3 days later, another package showed up, again for Sarah Wilson. Same box tape, same Prime branding, same address. I checked my Amazon account just in case, because my first thought was I'd been hacked or something stupid like that. Nothing. I brought that one upstairs too, and my landlady got prickly, like she thought I was creating drama. "I don't know any Sarah," she said, and closed the door. Then a third box arrived the next week, still Sarah Wilson. That's when I started paying attention, because 3 mistakes in a row isn't a mistake, and I knew that. By the 4th box, I felt weird enough to open everything. I know the rule, don't open stuff that isn't yours, but someone was using my address and leaving me to deal with it. Inside were random cheap items, $15 headphones, 3 blank notebooks, a pack of men's socks, and a cheap Chinese flashlight. Nothing valuable. Nothing that even made sense together. No card, no invoice, no note. It wasn't a scam where they ship you something and then bill you later, because nothing came with it. It felt like junk sent on purpose to keep showing up here. I called Amazon again and read off the tracking numbers like I was reporting a missing person. The rep put me on hold, came back, and said all the orders were paid with prepaid gift cards. The account email looked like random letters and numbers, something anyone could create in a minute. That was the moment it stopped looking like a mix-up and started looking planned. Someone wanted regular packages arriving here like I constantly got deliveries. I couldn't figure out why, but it made my stomach drop, because they had my exact rental address, knew where I lived. Changed the door lock myself, paid for it, and ignored my landlady's annoyance. Installed a peephole camera app on my phone. Packages kept coming for 2 more weeks, at different times, always Amazon couriers scanning barcodes and leaving. The camera showed them, no stranger, no car watching, and I stopped saying it was harmless. Then one morning by the park, I found a white cardstock note under wiper with almost calligraphic handwriting. It said, "Hope you like the gifts. I remember how you loved surprises. Signed M." The paper was textured, the ink dark blue, and I read it again. I barely slept after that note. I'd read it, file it, then pull it back out like it might change. I made a list of every M I'd ever known and hated how long it got once you include old coworkers and random classmates. I kept telling myself it could be a prank, but the Amazon stuff felt planned, like someone was keeping a schedule on me. At around 3 in the morning on the third night, half asleep on the couch, it hit me. Mark. I hadn't thought about him in years. I dated him 7 years ago in Seattle before I moved to Austin. I was 23 and in grad school. He was in his 40s and worked as a university librarian. He came off quiet and smart and, honestly, safe. For about 2 months it was normal. Dinner after my classes, him asking what I was working on, me liking that he remembered small details. Then he started showing up at my coffee shop job without warning. First time he said he was in the area. The next day he was back with flowers, and then it was basically every day. My co-workers would whisper, "Your boyfriend's back," like it was funny. If I didn't answer, he'd call again, 30 to 40 times a night, and leave voicemails like he was documenting something. When I tried to break up after 3 months, he didn't yell. He didn't threaten me. He just switched to letters. Not emails. Actual handwritten letters on nice paper. Sometimes 5 or 6 pages. He analyzed our psychological compatibility like it was a report, quoting Jung and astrology, writing about how our energies matched and how I was scared of intimacy. He'd leave little crystal figurines on my car, or antique trinkets from used bookstores, each with a note explaining the symbolic meaning. It sounds silly typed out, but living it felt like being studied. The restraining order happened after he showed up at my apartment door at 2 in the morning with roses, smiling like I was supposed to be grateful. I got a temporary order, moved to another state a month later, changed my phone number, deleted my socials, all of it. I genuinely believed it was done. So finding that M in Austin made me feel like the last 7 years were fake, like he'd been waiting. After the car note, the packages stopped the very next day. My camera kept recording regular street stuff only. Mailman, neighbors, kids on bikes. I filed a police report anyway and showed them the note photo and explained Mark's history. The detective listened and wrote everything down, but he was blunt. No direct threats meant limited options. Mark hadn't technically violated anything because the order was issued in Washington and expired 2 years ago. And anyone could send Amazon boxes to any address, so proving it was him would be almost impossible. He said to call again if anything changes. 3 months later, I moved across town. I didn't tell anyone the exact address, even friends I trust, just the general East Side area, and I gave my family a P.O. box at a UPS store instead. It's been 6 months with nothing new, but I still check the doorbell camera obsessively 10 times a day, and sometimes I wake up and check the last hour's recording before I can fall back asleep. I hate that this is my routine now, that I'm always looking for patterns, and when I pass mailboxes in any building, I automatically scan for boxes with strange names addressed somewhere nearby. I rented this small cottage on the edge of town after breaking up with my boyfriend. Needed something cheap and fast because lawyers ate all my savings. I was 26, and I didn't want roommates, so I took the first place that was clean and didn't have holes in the roof. The landlord was Frank, in his 60s, talked like he was doing me a favor. During the walkthrough he said, "House is old, stuff breaks. I'll come once a week, Saturdays around noon, for the garden and small repairs." I nodded because I didn't know plumbing and didn't want to learn during an emergency. For the first 2 months it went exactly like he promised. Frank came Saturdays around noon, mowed the lawn, checked the pipes, and asked if I'd noticed anything weird. I'd say no, we'd do an awkward, "have a good one," and he'd leave. It was boring in the best way. Then, late September, small things started messing with my head. One morning I woke up and the coffee mug I definitely left in the sink was clean and sitting on the drying rack. I stood there thinking, did I wash this without remembering? I'd been stressed, sleeping light, waking up to notifications from my lawyer, so it felt possible. A few days later, I noticed the jar of peanut butter that had been almost full was now half empty. I remember twisting the lid off, looking at the spoon marks, and getting annoyed at myself. Stress eating at night was already a thing, and I wasn't exactly proud of it, so I blamed that and moved on. But then more obvious stuff happened. The bathroom door I always close before bed would be open in the morning. Not cracked, just open. The kitchen chair would be pulled out from the table when I hadn't touched it. The basement light, in a basement I never went into, was on a couple times. I checked all the locks, front door, back door, windows, everything. Locked. No sign of anyone forcing anything. That's when my brain went to the worst option. Maybe I'm forgetting whole chunks of time. I told my friend Jessica, and she tried to make it normal. "You're alone, you're stressed, you're adjusting," she said. "It happens." I wanted to believe her, but every morning I was doing this little inventory of the house like I was grading myself. So I bought a camera. Cheap Wi-Fi thing from Amazon, about $20, and I pointed it at the kitchen and living room. I didn't put it in the bedroom or anything dramatic. I just wanted proof that I wasn't walking around at night like a zombie. I told myself it was for peace of mind, not because I thought there was an intruder. The first alert came Wednesday around 3 a.m. I was in my bedroom with headphones on, working late on a project, when my phone buzzed with a motion notification. I remember my stomach dropping before I even opened the app, but that's what it did. I opened the clip and saw someone walk through the living room toward the kitchen. The quality was bad because of the darkness and the cheap camera, but the silhouette was clear. A tall man. My hand started shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone. I grabbed the baseball bat I'd bought recently, ran out, and started turning on all the lights. The house was empty. All doors locked, windows closed. I checked every room, even closets, then went down to the basement because I couldn't not. Nobody. I watched the recording over and over. The figure appeared, walked to the kitchen, and disappeared around the corner where the camera didn't reach. I called the police at 4 a.m. 2 officers showed up about 20 minutes later. They searched the house, basement, checked locks and windows, and found no sign of a break-in. One officer shrugged and said it might be a camera glitch or a shadow from a tree outside, maybe car headlights reflecting. I didn't argue but knew there were no trees opposite that window and the road was too far for headlight reflections. The next incident happened exactly 1 week later, and this time I got solid proof. It was Friday around 2 a.m. I'd already gone to bed but couldn't sleep. I kept checking the camera every 30 minutes, bat next to my bed. The camera sent a notification and my whole body went cold. I opened the app in live mode and froze. Someone was standing at my refrigerator with their back to the camera. They weren't rushing or sneaking. They were just there like they belonged. Then the fridge door opened and the light hit his face in profile for a second. I recognized him immediately. It was Frank. Same shoulders, bald spot, that slow step like his knees hurt. My stomach dropped. He took out a carton of milk, poured it into my mug, the same mug that had been clean on the rack, and drank it. No hesitation. He put the milk and mug back, closed the fridge, and walked out of frame toward the front door. I could see keys clipped to his belt when he leaned into the fridge. That detail made it worse, because it meant he didn't even have to try. He looked comfortable, like this was routine for him already. I lay there in the dark, too scared to breathe. I listened for sounds and tried to figure out if he was coming down the hall. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would give me away. About a minute later, I heard a quiet click, then the front door closing. I jumped up, grabbed my phone and bat, turned on my bedroom light, and locked myself inside. My hands shook so bad I could barely dial 911. When the dispatcher answered, I said, "My landlord is in my house. I have video." The police came 12 minutes later, The same two officers from last time. I showed them the clip. One leaned closer to my phone and said, "That's Frank?" I said, "Yes, that's him." This time they didn't brush it off. They filed a report and told me to email the footage. They called Frank in for questioning. I sat on my bed holding the bat until an officer came back and said Frank was on his way. An hour later, they said he denied everything. Home asleep, impossible. Camera broken, somebody faked it. The older officer explained the problem. Frank had keys, and landlords can enter for repairs, but they should notify tenants first. Since he didn't threaten me, didn't steal anything obvious, and didn't damage the place, it was a messy case. Maybe a lease violation, maybe invasion of privacy, but not something they could arrest him for that night. They told me to get a lawyer and change the locks. I did both. Saturday morning, I called a locksmith and had the front and back locks replaced without asking Frank. I knew it violated the lease, but I wasn't sleeping there with his key working. On Sunday, he called screaming that I had no right to change his locks, and he would evict me and charge fees. I didn't fight with him on the phone. I hung up, emailed him the video, and wrote that I'd sue for invasion of privacy, stalking, and emotional damage if he didn't leave me alone. He went quiet. I moved out 2 weeks later without waiting for the end of the month and lost my $1,000 deposit. I still don't know how long he'd been doing it before the camera, or what else he did in my house while I slept.